Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Appalachian Mountains stretch from Canada to Alabama, forming one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. Within these ancient peaks and valleys lie communities isolated by geography, traditions preserved across generations, and secrets buried deep in the soil. In the mist-shrouded hollows and dense forests of Appalachia, something stirs, something that defies explanation. Something that has been witnessed by credible people park rangers, law enforcement, ordinary citizens going about their lives until they encountered the inexplicable. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2012 when Park Ranger Daniel Whitman began his final patrol through the Appalachian Trail section near Blackwood Ridge. At 47, Daniel had spent 22 years with the National Park Service, the last decade stationed in the remote Appalachian outpost. His colleagues knew him as methodical, observant, and deeply familiar with every trail and landmark in his jurisdiction. The autumn air carried the crisp scent of decaying leaves and pine needles as Daniel made his routine checks along the trail. His official report, filed at 3:17 p.m., noted seasonal changes in foliage and recommended trail maintenance at mile marker 47. Weather conditions were recorded as clear, with temperatures dropping to 42 degrees by nightfall. Nothing in his final transmission suggested anything unusual. At 7:48 p.m., Daniel radio dispatched to confirm his position at Blackwood Ridge Overlook before beginning his return journey to the ranger station. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Search parties formed at dawn the following morning when Daniel failed to return to his scheduled post. Deputy Sheriff Mark Richardson led the initial search team, noting in his log that Daniel's government-issued truck was found parked at the trailhead, engine cold, with half a tank of fuel. The vehicle contained Daniel's pack, water bottles, and personal belongings, but his service weapon and radio were missing. The only tracks found in the damp earth were Daniel's own boot prints leading into the forest, none returning. The Appalachian terrain proved challenging for search teams. Dense thickets of rhododendron and mountain laurel created natural barriers, while steep ravines and rock outcroppings limited visibility. By the third day, 12 search teams comprising over 60 volunteers and law enforcement personnel had covered a 5-mile radius around Blackwood Ridge. The only significant discovery came from canine units, who led handlers to a small clearing where Daniel's radio was found lying beside a fallen log, its battery removed and placed neatly beside it. "I never thought I'd be the one telling this story," Deputy Richardson later testified in the official inquiry. "But what we found in that clearing, it doesn't make sense." The radio was deliberately disabled, not damaged, and around it, the ground was disturbed, but not like a struggle. More like something had been kneeling there, facing the device, before placing it carefully on the ground. As the search entered its second week, strange reports began filtering in from hikers and other rangers in the area. Several described hearing whistling sounds coming from deep within the forest after nightfall, an unusual occurrence during hunting season when wildlife typically grows silent. 2 separate parties reported seeing what appeared to be a dim light moving through the woods at impossible speeds, traversing steep terrain with no visible source or sound. The investigation took a perplexing turn on day 11, when searchers discovered Daniel's service pistol in a shallow stream nearly 3 miles from where his radio had been found. Ballistics expert Dr. Ellen Harding examined the weapon and noted in her report, "The firearm shows no signs of discharge or damage. The serial number matches records. What's unusual is its positioning wedged between rocks, as if deliberately placed there, not dropped or thrown. Perhaps most disturbing were the accounts from experienced trackers who joined the search effort. Cherokee County Search and Rescue Team leader Michael Crow described finding footprints that appeared intermittently alongside Daniel's tracks. These weren't human prints, Crow stated in his official report. The stride length was wrong, the pressure distribution impossible for a person, and they appeared and disappeared without logical explanation. In 20 years of search and rescue, I've never seen anything like it. The search officially concluded after 21 days, with Daniel Whitman listed as missing in circumstances yet to be determined. The National Park Service conducted an internal review, noting no prior incidents or complaints regarding Daniel's mental state or job performance. His wife, Sarah Whitman, told investigators that Daniel had seemed a bit distracted in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, mentioning strange sounds during his patrols but dismissing them as wildlife. Local Appalachian historian Dr. Raymond Mitchell provided context during the investigation, sharing accounts from early settlers about unexplained disappearances in the Blackwood Ridge area. According to Mitchell's research, at least 7 similar cases had been documented between 1880 and 1973, all involving experienced outdoorsmen who vanished without trace in the same section of forest. The Cherokee, who originally inhabited this region, avoided certain areas. Mitchell explained, they spoke of entities that could mimic human sounds to lure people deeper into the woods. Of course, we dismissed such tales as folklore until cases like Daniel's emerged. 5 years after Daniel Whitman's disappearance, the case remains open with the National Park Service. The Appalachian Trail section near Blackwood Ridge now bears a small plaque commemorating his service. But hikers and locals continue to report strange occurrences in the area. Park Ranger Jennifer Martinez, who now patrols Daniel's former territory, submitted a report in 2017 describing unexplained whistling sounds and footprints that don't match any known animal or human during her rounds. The Whitman family has never given up hope. In a 2018 interview, Daniel's daughter, Emily Whitman Baker, shared her father's journal entries from the weeks before his disappearance. He wrote about hearing whistling that sounded too deliberate to be birds, she explained. He mentioned finding circular patterns of broken branches that didn't match any animal behavior. But he was a practical man. He thought it might be poachers or kids messing around in the woods. No trace of Daniel Whitman has ever been found beyond the radio and pistol. The case file remains active in the National Park Service's Missing Persons Database, incident number AP 2012-047, with the final notation reading, circumstances suggest possible third-party involvement, though evidence remains inconclusive. The Appalachian Mountains continue their ancient watch over Blackwood Ridge, keeping whatever happened to Daniel Whitman that October evening as secret as the mist that shrouds those peaks each morning. Search teams still occasionally find strange formations of sticks and stones in the area patterns that don't match known animal behavior or human activity. As one local resident put it, some places have their own rules. Blackwood Ridge is one of them. In the spring of 2015, anthropology student Rebecca Carter embarked on what should have been a routine field recording expedition in the Monongahela National Forest. The 23-year-old graduate student was documenting disappearing Appalachian dialects for her thesis at West Virginia University. Her equipment, professional-grade audio recorders and cameras, were designed to capture the subtle nuances of mountain speech patterns. Rebecca had arranged interviews with elderly residents in several remote communities, planning to spend 3 weeks collecting oral histories. Her advisor, Professor Martin Hayes, reviewed her itinerary and approved her research plan, noting in his endorsement that Ms. Carter has demonstrated exceptional fieldwork capabilities and cultural sensitivity. The university's research office logged her departure on April 3rd, with a scheduled return date of April 24th. The first week proceeded according to plan. Rebecca sent regular email updates to her faculty advisor, attaching audio samples and preliminary transcriptions. Her recordings captured not just the distinctive Appalachian speech patterns, but also ambient sounds of the environment, wind through the trees, distant train whistles, the calls of native birds. These background noises would later prove significant. On April 12th, Rebecca interviewed 87-year-old Martha Endicott in the small community of Helvetia. The recording captured Mrs. Endicott's memories of childhood in the isolated valley, her voice thin but steady as she described traditional customs and beliefs. Midway through the interview, both women reacted to a strange sound outside a high-pitched whistling that Rebecca described in her field notes as unlike any bird I've ever heard. The recording captured Mrs. Murray Endicott's whispered comment. "That's what they call the wood whistle. Haven't heard it in years. You don't want to answer it." Rebecca's last email to Professor Hayes was sent on April 14th from a public library in Elkins. She mentioned her plan to hike into a remote area known as the Canaan Valley Backcountry to record natural sounds for her thesis's acoustic ecology section. "There's an old abandoned fire tower there," she wrote. "Perfect vantage point for environmental recordings. I'll be back in touch by April 17th. When April 17th passed without contact, Professor Hayes initially assumed poor cell reception or delayed access to internet facilities. By April 20th, concern had grown sufficiently for him to contact the Randolph County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Thomas Mitchell filed the missing person report, noting Rebecca's last known location and intended destination. A search was organized for the following morning. The search teams found Rebecca's rental car parked at the trailhead to the Canaan Valley Backcountry on April 21st. Inside were her camping supplies, personal belongings, and most of her recording equipment. The only items missing were her primary audio recorder, a high-quality device capable of capturing frequencies beyond human hearing, and her camera. Her tent showed signs of recent use, and a partially eaten meal suggested she had planned to return. On the third day of searching, rescue teams discovered Rebecca's backpack at the base of the old fire tower she had mentioned in her email. The tower, abandoned since the 1970s, stood rusting against the sky, its metal stairs partially collapsed. The backpack contained her research notes, water bottles, and a detailed map with her planned route highlighted in yellow. A search of the tower yielded nothing but dust and bird droppings. The breakthrough came on day 5, when K9 units located Rebecca's primary audio recorder, buried beneath leaves approximately 50 yards from the tower. The device was intact, but the battery was depleted. Evidence technicians transported it to the State Police Forensic Laboratory in Charleston, where audio specialists carefully preserved the files before attempting to analyze the recordings. What they found would later become known as the Carter recording. The first 45 minutes contained typical field recordings, wind, birds, the rustle of Rebecca's movements. Then, at approximately 1:17 p.m. on the timestamp, Rebecca's voice can be heard saying, "That's strange. I hear whistling again," like what Mrs. Endicott was talking about. For the next 12 minutes, the recording captures the whistling sound. Rebecca described a clear, melodic pattern that rises and falls in a way no bird or natural phenomenon could produce. Audio analyst Dr. Susan Harmon later testified, "The frequency range of this whistling exceeds human vocal capacity. It contains harmonics and undertones that shouldn't be possible from a biological source." At the 28-minute mark, Rebecca's breathing becomes audible, rapid, and shallow. "I'm going to follow it," she whispers, "just to see what's making the sound. I'll stay on the trail." For the next 10 minutes, the recording captures Rebecca's footsteps on the forest floor, interspersed with the continuing whistling. Then, at approximately 1:47 p.m., something changes. A second whistling sound begins, this one deeper, from a different direction. Rebecca's breathing quickens further. "There are two of them," she murmurs. "That's not possible." The recording continues for another 8 minutes, with Rebecca's movements becoming more erratic. The whistling sounds begin to harmonize, creating an eerie chord that seems to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Rebecca's voice, when she speaks, is trembling. "This isn't right. I'm turning back." What follows is the most disturbing part of the recording. For 3 minutes, the whistling stops abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence. Then, a new sound emerges, something audio experts later described as a clicking or chittering noise. Like insects, but with a rhythmic pattern suggesting intelligence. Rebecca's breathing becomes panicked. "I can't find the trail," she says, her voice cracking. Everything looks the same. The clicking is getting closer. The final 2 minutes of the recording capture what sounds like Rebecca running, her breathing ragged, branches snapping. The clicking sound grows louder, accompanied by what audio analysts described as a low thrumming vibration. Then, Rebecca screams once a short, sharp sound cut off abruptly. The recording continues for another 37 seconds, capturing only the clicking and thrumming sounds, which then fade into silence. The search for Rebecca Carter continued for 3 weeks, eventually covering over 50 square miles of rugged terrain. Beyond the recorder, no other trace of her was ever found. The case remains open with the Randolph County Sheriff's Office, file number 2015-047-MP. Professor Hayes, who listened to the complete recording before it was sealed as evidence, later wrote in a university report, "The acoustic phenomena captured on Ms. Carter's recording defy conventional explanation. The whistling sounds, in particular, exhibit characteristics inconsistent with known biological sources. While I cannot speculate as to what happened to Rebecca, I can confirm that the recording documents something genuinely extraordinary." The Carter recording remains classified as evidence in an ongoing investigation, though portions have been analyzed by acoustic experts from several universities. Dr. Harmon's final report concludes, "The recording captures sounds that cannot be attributed to any known animal or human source. The frequency range, harmonic structure, and apparent coordination between multiple sources suggest an unknown phenomenon." Rebecca's family established a scholarship in her name for students studying Appalachian culture and dialects. Each year, at the university's memorial service, a moment of silence is observed at 1:47 p.m. The timestamp when Rebecca first noted there were 2 sources of the whistling. Local residents in the Canaan Valley area have long spoken of the wood whistle, describing it as a sound that calls your name if you listen too long. Since Rebecca's disappearance, hikers in the area have reported increased instances of the phenomenon, though most refuse to discuss it with outsiders. As one elderly resident told a reporter, "Some things are better left unknown. The mountains have their own ways, and they don't always match what science says is possible." In the small community of Hollow Creek, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky, strange lights have been reported for generations. Local folklore speaks of will-o'-the-wisps that lead travelers astray. But in the summer of 2016, these legends took on a terrifying reality for the Henderson family. Robert and Margaret Henderson had purchased the abandoned Henderson family homestead in 2014, seeking to escape city life in Lexington. The property, consisting of 50 acres of forest and meadowland, had been in Robert's family for generations, but had sat vacant for nearly 30 years. The couple spent 2 years renovating the century-old farmhouse before moving in with their 2 children, 12-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Noah. The first unusual occurrence happened on the night of July 8, 2016. Robert was working late in his study when he noticed what appeared to be a pale glow through the trees at the edge of his property. Assuming it might be hunters or lost hikers, he grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the light, which promptly vanished as he approached. He noted the incident in his journal, but dismissed it as a trick of the evening fog. 3 nights later, Margaret was putting the children to bed when Emma asked about the floating lights outside her window. Margaret looked out to see 3 small orbs of light, approximately the size of baseballs, moving silently through the forest behind the house. They moved in an erratic pattern, sometimes hovering, sometimes darting between trees with impossible speed. Margaret watched for several minutes before calling Robert to witness the phenomenon. "I've never seen anything like it," Robert later told investigators. "They weren't flashlights or drones. They moved too fluidly, too silently. And the color, it was this pale blue-white, like lightning captured in a glass ball." The Hendersons contacted the local sheriff's department the following day. Deputy Brian Miller took their statement, but admitted he had no explanation for what they had seen. "I've lived in this county my whole life," Miller noted in his report. "People talk about strange lights in the mountains, but most dismiss it as folklore or misidentification of natural phenomena. The Hendersons seemed credible, though, and they weren't the type to make up stories." Over the next 2 weeks, the lights appeared with increasing frequency. The Hendersons began documenting the occurrences, taking photographs and videos that showed the lights moving in patterns that defied explanation. In one particularly striking video, the lights appear to form geometric shapes before dispersing into the forest. The family's growing unease turned to fear on July 23rd, when Noah came running into the house, claiming one of the lights had followed him to the edge of the yard. Robert went outside to investigate and found a circular patch of grass approximately 6 feet in diameter that appeared scorched, though no fire had been reported. The grass within the circle was yellowed and brittle to the touch, despite recent rainfall. Concerned for their children's safety, the Hendersons contacted paranormal researcher Dr. Elaine Warren from the University of Kentucky. Dr. Warren specialized in unexplained phenomena and had previously investigated similar reports in the Appalachian region. She arrived with a team of graduate students and scientific equipment on July 29th. "What we found at the Henderson property was extraordinary," Dr. Warren later wrote in her research paper. "The electromagnetic readings in the area where the lights appeared were significantly elevated compared to surrounding areas. The soil samples from the scorched circle showed unusual mineral concentrations, particularly of elements not typically found in Kentucky soil." Dr. Warren's team set up monitoring equipment around the property, hoping to capture data during the next appearance of the lights. They didn't have to wait long. On the night of August 2nd, the lights returned, appearing first as distant glows before moving closer to the farmhouse. The monitoring equipment recorded dramatic fluctuations in electromagnetic fields as the lights approached. Thermal imaging cameras captured temperature anomalies around the lights, which appeared to be significantly cooler than the surrounding air. Most disturbingly, audio equipment picked up a low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from the lights themselves. Graduate student Michael Chen was operating a spectrometer when the lights suddenly changed their behavior. They stopped moving and just hovered there for about 30 seconds, Chen later reported. Then they all converged into a single point of light that grew incredibly bright before disappearing completely. The spectrometer went haywire, readings off the charts for elements that shouldn't have been there. The most terrifying incident occurred on August 5th. Emma Henderson was playing in the yard when she suddenly froze, staring into the woods. When Margaret called to her, Emma didn't respond. Robert rushed to his daughter and found her standing motionless, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. It was like she was in a trance, Robert later recounted. We couldn't get her to respond. She just kept pointing toward the woods and saying, "They want me to come with them." The Hendersons rushed Emma to the local hospital, where doctors found no medical explanation for her condition. She remained unresponsive for nearly 3 hours before suddenly snapping out of it with no memory of what had happened. Pediatric neurologist Dr. Sarah Jenkins documented the case, noting, "The patient presented with symptoms consistent with an absent seizure, though EEG readings were normal. The mother reported that similar episodes had occurred in their family's history, though never medically documented. This incident prompted the Hendersons to contact Robert's elderly great-aunt, who had lived on the property as a child. 87-year-old Mary Henderson revealed that the family had a long history of encounters with what she called the forest lights. According to family lore, these lights would appear periodically, sometimes interacting with family members, particularly children. My grandmother used to say the lights were drawn to certain bloodlines," Mary explained. She believed they were harmless if treated with respect, but dangerous if approached. The family learned to leave offering small trinkets or food at the edge of the property to keep the lights satisfied. Disturbed by this revelation and concerned for their children's safety, the Hendersons decided to leave their home temporarily. They stayed with relatives in Lexington while Dr. Warren and her team continued their investigation. During their absence, the monitoring equipment recorded several more appearances of the lights, including one incident where the lights appeared to interact with the trinkets the family had left behind, causing them to glow faintly before disappearing. The Hendersons returned home after 2 weeks, taking precautions recommended by Dr. Warren, including installing electromagnetic shielding in the children's bedrooms. For a time, the lights seemed to disappear. Then, on September 14th, Robert discovered a series of strange symbols carved into the trees at the edge of his property symbols that matched those described in his family's journals dating back to the 1800s. The final incident occurred on October 31st, Halloween night. The Hendersons were inside watching a movie when the power suddenly went out. Robert went to check the breaker box and found nothing wrong. When he returned to the living room, he discovered Emma and Noah standing at the window, watching as dozens of lights moved through the forest in what appeared to be a coordinated pattern. They were dancing, Noah later told his parents, like they were celebrating something. Margaret captured the event on her phone, creating a 3-minute video that shows the lights moving in intricate patterns across the mountainside. The video, later analyzed by experts, shows the lights responding to each other's movements in ways that suggest intelligence or communication. After this incident, the Hendersons made the difficult decision to sell their property and return to Lexington. Before leaving, they consulted with Cherokee elder Thomas Redbird, who explained that the area had long been considered sacred by indigenous peoples. Some places are thresholds between worlds, Redbird told them. The lights you've seen are guardians of that threshold. They mean no harm, but they can be confusing to those who don't understand their purpose. The Henderson family moved away in early 2017, but the lights continue to appear in Hollow Creek. New property owners have reported similar sightings, though none as frequent or intense as those experienced by the Hendersons. Dr. Warren continues her research, though she admits she may never fully understand the phenomenon. The Hollow Creek lights represent one of the most well-documented cases of anomalous light phenomena in the United States, she wrote in her final report. While we can measure their effects on the environment, their origin and purpose remain mysterious. Perhaps some things are not meant to be understood. only respected. The Martin family's vacation in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee was meant to be a peaceful getaway from their busy lives in Nashville. Mark and Sarah Martin, along with their teenage son Michael and daughter Emily, rented a secluded cabin near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for the week of Thanksgiving 2018. The cabin, owned by a local family for generations, sat on 10 acres of forest land with no immediate neighbors. The family arrived on November 19th, finding the cabin well-stocked and comfortable despite its rustic appearance. The first 2 days passed uneventfully, with the family enjoying hiking trails and exploring nearby small towns. The weather was typical for late November crisp days with cold nights, the forest floor covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves. The first unusual occurrence happened on the night of November 21st. Mark was building a fire in the stone fireplace when he noticed what appeared to be small handprints in the ash, though no one had used the fireplace since their arrival. The prints were too small to belong to any family member, approximately the size of a child's hand. Mark dismissed it as a strange pattern left by the previous renters, though he noted the ash hadn't been disturbed when they first arrived. The following evening, Sarah was reading in the living room while the rest of the family slept, when she heard what sounded like whispering from the back bedroom, assuming it was the wind or perhaps Michael talking in his sleep. She didn't investigate until she heard it again, a soft, indistinct voice that seemed to come from just outside the cabin window. "I got up to check on the kids," Sarah later recounted in her statement to the Blount County Sheriff's Office. Both were sound asleep. The whispering continued, though, and I realized it was coming from outside. When I looked through the window, I saw nothing but darkness and the trees swaying in the wind. Sarah woke Mark, and together they searched the perimeter of the cabin with flashlights, finding no footprints or signs of intrusion. The only unusual discovery was a series of small stones arranged in a circle on the forest floor, approximately 30 feet from the back door. The stones appeared to have been placed deliberately, forming a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. The next morning, Michael mentioned hearing someone call his name during the night. "It sounded like a little kid," he told his parents over breakfast. "I thought it was Emily playing a joke, but she was asleep in her bed." Emily denied calling to her brother, and the family began to feel increasingly uneasy. Mark contacted the cabin owner, local resident Brenda Campbell, to ask about the property's history. Campbell seemed hesitant to discuss it, merely mentioning that some folks say the old place has spirits, but I've never had any problems. That evening, as the family prepared dinner, the power suddenly went out. Mark went to check the circuit breaker, located in a small utility room at the back of the cabin. When he opened the door, he found the breaker panel covered in what appeared to be childlike drawings, created in what looked like charcoal or ash. The drawings depicted stick figures with unusually large eyes, arranged in a circle around a central figure that appeared to be lying down. What really disturbed me was that the drawings hadn't been there when I checked the cabin upon arrival, Mark later told investigators. "I'm certain of it, and the breaker hadn't tripped, the main switch had been turned off manually." The family decided to cut their vacation short and leave the following morning. As they packed their belongings, Emily noticed something outside her bedroom window, a series of small handprints on the glass, on the outside of the cabin. The prints were identical in size to those Mark had found in the fireplace ash. The final incident occurred around 2 a.m. The family was awakened by a loud banging on the cabin door, not aggressive, but rhythmic, like a child knocking. Mark grabbed a baseball bat and approached the door, calling out to whoever was outside. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of small footsteps running around the cabin, seemingly on all sides at once. "I've never been so terrified in my life," Sarah later stated. It sounded like multiple children running around the cabin, But when I looked out the windows, I saw nothing. The footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly stopped. The family spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, too frightened to sleep. At dawn, they quickly loaded their car and left without looking back. Mark drove directly to the Blount County Sheriff's Office to file a report, though he admitted he wasn't sure what exactly he was reporting. Deputy James Harrison took their statement, noting the family's genuine fear and the consistency of their accounts. "I've lived in this county my whole life," Harrison later wrote in his report. "There are stories about that cabin, tales of children's spirits and strange occurrences. Most locals avoid the place, especially around Thanksgiving." The investigation revealed that the cabin had been built in the 1920s on land that once housed a small mountain community. According to local historical records, the community had been abandoned in the 1930s after a diphtheria outbreak claimed the lives of several children, who were buried in a small cemetery that once stood near where the cabin was later built. Local historian Eleanor Thompson provided additional context, sharing stories passed down through generations about the area. The mountain folk believed that the spirits of children who died before their time remained near where they were buried, Thompson explained. They said these spirits would sometimes play tricks on living children, not out of malice, but loneliness. The Martin family returned to Nashville, but the experiences continued to affect them. Emily began having nightmares about small figures with large eyes watching her from the forest. Michael became withdrawn and anxious, particularly at night. The family sought counseling from Dr. Rachel Monroe, a therapist specializing in trauma. What struck me about the Martin family's experience was the consistency of their accounts and the physical evidence they described, Dr. Monroe later wrote in a case study. While one might dismiss their experiences as hallucinations or group hysteria, the physical manifestations, the handprints, the drawings, the arranged stones, suggest something more tangible. In the spring of 2019, forensic analyst James Chen examined photographs the Martins had taken of the handprints and drawings. The handprints show a level of detail inconsistent with accidental patterns, Chen reported. The pressure points and ridge patterns, while not clear enough for identification, suggest they were made by actual hands, not random marks. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that similar experiences had been reported by previous renters of the cabin. Blount County records showed at least 5 police reports between 2005 and 2017 describing strange occurrences at the property, including unexplained childlike sounds, mysterious handprints, and objects moving on their own. The cabin was sold in 2019 to an out-of-state buyer who was unaware of its history. The new owners, the Peterson family, reported similar experiences during their first month in the property, including the discovery of small handprints in dust and ash, and the sound of children playing when no children were present. The Martin family eventually moved from Nashville, seeking to put their experiences behind them. In a 2021 interview, Sarah Martin reflected on their time in the cabin. "I don't know what we encountered there, spirits, ghosts, or something else entirely. I only know that it was real and it changed our family forever. Sometimes, late at night, I still think I hear the sound of small footsteps outside my window." The Ashland cabin remains standing, though local real estate agents now disclose its history to potential renters. Some visitors report nothing unusual, while others describe experiences similar to those of the Martin family. As Deputy Harrison noted in his final report, some places hold memories so strong they never truly fade. The Ashland cabin appears to be one of those places. In the depths of McDowell County, West Virginia, coal mining has been a way of life for generations. The abandoned Eagle's Nest mine, closed since 1987 after a catastrophic collapse that killed 12 miners, stands as a silent monument to the region's industrial past. In October 2019, 3 urban explorers would discover that something still moved in those dark tunnels. James Richardson, 28, his girlfriend Michelle Carter, 26, and their friend David Kim, 27, shared an interest in abandoned industrial sites. The trio, experienced in urban exploration, had researched the Eagle's Nest mine extensively before their visit, studying old maps and safety protocols. They arrived on October 12th, equipped with headlamps, respirators, and communication devices. The entrance to the mine, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation, yawned dark against the autumn afternoon. The air that emerged carried the damp, earthy smell of deep underground spaces. And the explorers signed their names on a registry maintained by local enthusiasts, a practice that helped track who entered the mine in case of emergency. The first hour of exploration passed uneventfully. The mine's main shaft extended deep into the mountain, its walls lined with the remnants of support timbers and abandoned equipment. The explorers photographed rusted machinery, discarded tools, and the personal effects left behind by miners decades ago: a boot, a lunch pail, a worn playing card. We were documenting the historical aspects of the mine, James later told investigators. Michelle is a photographer, and she was capturing these incredible images of decay and abandonment. We were careful not to disturb anything, treating it like a museum. The first unusual occurrence happened around 3 p.m. as the explorers reached a junction approximately half a mile from the entrance. David, who was checking their position against an old map, suddenly stopped and held up his hand for silence. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. James and Michelle listened, hearing only the dripping of water somewhere in the distance and their own breathing amplified by their respirators. David shook his head, perhaps imagining things, and they continued onward. 20 minutes later, as they navigated a narrow passage, Michelle suddenly gasped and pointed her flashlight toward a side tunnel. "There," she whispered. "Did you see that?" The others saw nothing but darkness, though Michelle insisted she had seen a small light moving deep in the side tunnel. "It wasn't a reflection," she later stated. "It was a pale blue light, like a lantern, and it moved around the corner before disappearing." The trio decided to investigate, carefully making their way down the side tunnel. The passage narrowed as they progressed, the ceiling lowering until they had to crouch to proceed. After approximately 50 yards, they reached a dead end, a rock wall that appeared to be part of a recent collapse. There was no way anything could have passed this wall, James noted in his written account. "We checked thoroughly for openings or crevices, but found nothing." Yet Michelle was certain she had seen a light moving down this passage. Growing uneasy, the explorers decided to turn back. As they made their way toward the main shaft, they heard what sounded like whistling a clear, melodic tune that echoed through the tunnels. The sound seemed to come from ahead of them, though they couldn't identify its source. "That's when we started getting really scared," Michelle later recounted. The whistling sounded human, but it had an eerie quality to it. And it seemed to be moving, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, as if whatever was making it was navigating the tunnels ahead of us. The explorers called out, announcing their presence, but the whistling continued, unchanged. They decided to retreat more quickly, their earlier confidence replaced by a growing sense of dread. As they approached the main shaft, David suddenly stopped and pointed toward the floor. "Look," he said, his voice tense. "Footprints." In the dust covering the tunnel floor lay a series of footprints, small, bare footprints that appeared to have been made recently. The prints led away from the explorers, deeper into the mine, though they had seen no one else enter. We were in an abandoned coal mine, miles from anywhere, wearing boots and respirators, James later explained. Yet there were bare footprints in the dust, small enough to belong to a child. It made no sense. The trio decided to leave immediately, their curiosity overcome by fear. As they hurried back toward the entrance, they heard another sound, what Michelle described as a child's laughter, echoing through the tunnels. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions at once, making it impossible to pinpoint its origin. The final incident occurred as they approached the mine entrance. The three explorers were walking single file when James, who was in the lead, suddenly stopped and stumbled backward into Michelle. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. James pointed his flashlight toward the entrance, where a small figure stood silhouetted against the afternoon light. The figure appeared to be that of a young child, approximately 5 or 6 years old, wearing old-fashioned clothing. It just stood there for a moment, not moving, James later testified. Then it turned and walked away from the entrance, back into the mine. We didn't follow. We ran. The explorers emerged from the mine into the fading daylight and drove directly to the McDowell County Sheriff's Office to report their experience. Deputy Thomas Miller took their statement, noting their genuine fear and the consistency of their accounts. "I've heard stories about the Eagle's Nest mine for years," Miller later wrote in his report. "Local legend says it's haunted by the spirits of miners who died there, particularly children who sometimes accompanied their fathers underground. Most dismiss these stories as folklore, but the Richardson party seemed genuinely shaken by what they experienced." The following day, Miller accompanied Mine Safety Inspector Robert Hayes to examine the site. They found the explorers' signatures in the registry and followed their path into the mine, discovering the footprints they had described. Hayes photographed the prints, noting their unusual characteristics. The footprints showed pressure points and toe impressions consistent with actual human feet, Hayes later reported. What was strange was their size, approximately 6 inches in length, consistent with a small child, and their location in an area that had been undisturbed for decades. There was no explanation for how they could have appeared there. Further investigation revealed that the Eagle's Nest mine had a history of unusual reports. Former miners interviewed by Miller spoke of strange sounds and sightings, particularly around the area where the 1987 collapse had occurred. Several mentioned stories of a mine child, a small figure sometimes seen carrying a lantern through the tunnels. "My grandfather worked in that mine before it closed," local resident Ellen Thompson told investigators. "He used to say that on quiet nights, you could hear a child whistling in the tunnels. He thought it was the ghost of a boy who died there in the 1920s, though official records don't show any child fatalities." The Richardson party's experience gained media attention, attracting other paranormal investigators to the site. In November 2019, a team from the West Virginia Paranormal Research Society conducted a 3-day investigation, capturing what they claimed were electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained sounds, including the whistling described by the original explorers. The Eagle's Nest mine represents one of the most compelling cases of paranormal activity we've investigated, team leader Dr. Samuel Evans later wrote. The combination of historical accounts, physical evidence like the footprints, and multiple independent witness reports creates a compelling case for something genuinely unexplained occurring in those tunnels. The mine was officially sealed in early 2020 following safety concerns about its structural integrity. Before the sealing, several local residents reported seeing a small figure with a lantern near the entrance at dusk, though no one was ever found when authorities investigated. James Richardson, Michelle Carter, and David Kim never returned to the mine. though they continued their urban exploration activities elsewhere. In a 2022 interview, James reflected on their experience. "I consider myself a rational person, but what we encountered in that mine defies explanation. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else, but I know it was real. Sometimes, when everything's quiet, I can still hear that whistling." The Eagle's Nest mine remains sealed, its secrets buried deep within the mountain. Local legends continue to circulate about the mine child who still wanders the tunnels with a lantern, whistling softly in the darkness. As Deputy Miller noted in his final report, "Some places hold memories so strong they never truly fade." The Eagle's Nest mine appears to be one of those places. Search and rescue team leader Michael Harris had spent 15 years navigating the treacherous terrain of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The 42-year-old former Army Ranger knew the wilderness like the back of his hand, or so he thought until the autumn of 2020, when a routine rescue operation turned into something he still struggles to explain. The call came in on October 8, 2020. Two hikers, a couple from Charlotte, North Carolina, had failed to return from a day hike in the Linville Gorge Wilderness area. The couple, Thomas and Jessica Wright, both experienced hikers in their early 30s, had set out that morning on a trail that should have taken them approximately 6 hours to complete. By nightfall, when they hadn't returned to their lodge, the Wrights' traveling companions contacted the Burke County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff's Deputy Lisa Mitchell organized a search party, calling in Michael Harris and his specialized mountain rescue team. The weather was clear but cold, with temperatures expected to drop into the 30s overnight, dangerous conditions for unprepared hikers. Harris and his team began their search at dawn on October 9th, starting at the trailhead where the Wrights' car was still parked. The team split into two groups, following the main trail in opposite directions. Harris led his group eastward, toward the more challenging section of the trail that included several steep ascents and rocky overlooks. The first 4 hours of searching yielded nothing. No signs of the missing hikers, no indications of distress, no abandoned gear. The trail showed signs of recent use, but nothing out of the ordinary. Harris radioed his position to the other team at 11:30 a.m., confirming they had reached the halfway point without finding any trace of the Wrights. "We were beginning to worry," Harris later recounted in his official report. "The Linville Gorge is unforgiving terrain, and the longer people remain missing, especially overnight, the lower the chances of a successful rescue." The breakthrough came at 12:15 p.m., when team member Sarah Jenkins spotted something unusual off the trail, a piece of bright orange fabric caught on a thorn bush approximately 50 yards from the main path. The team moved to investigate, finding that the fabric matched the description of Jessica Wright's jacket. What they discovered next would haunt Harris for years to come. Following a faint trail of disturbed vegetation and occasional items dropped by the hikers, a water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, a single hiking boot, the team moved deeper into the forest, away from established trails. They weren't just lost, Harris noted in his report. Something or someone was leading them deeper into the wilderness. The trail they left was too deliberate, too consistent. It was as if they were following something, being drawn further and further from safety. After approximately half a mile of difficult terrain, the team found the Wrights' backpacks both opened, with contents scattered around. A search of the packs revealed that their emergency supplies, including first aid kits and extra food, were missing. Their cell phones were found nearby, both with dead batteries. The discovery that disturbed Harris most was a series of strange symbols carved into the bark of several nearby trees. The symbols, unlike any he had seen before, appeared to be arranged in a deliberate pattern, forming what looked like a pathway deeper into the forest. "I've spent my entire adult life in these mountains," Harris later testified. "I know every trail, every landmark, every natural formation. But these symbols, they weren't anything I recognized. They weren't trail markers or warning signs. They looked like something else entirely. Something purposeful, but alien." As the team continued following the trail of symbols and scattered belongings, they noticed something else unusual. The forest around them had grown strangely quiet. The normal sounds of birds, insects, and small animals had ceased, creating an unnatural silence that Harris described as deafening. The search continued for another hour before the team made their most disturbing discovery. In a small clearing, they found Jessica Wright, sitting on a fallen log, staring into space. She appeared unharmed, but was unresponsive to their calls. When Harris approached her, she slowly turned her head, her eyes wide with what he described as an expression of both terror and wonder. "They're beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The lights. They want us to follow them." When asked about her husband, Jessica seemed confused, as if waking from a dream. "Thomas? He went with them. To see the special place. He said he'd be right back." A thorough search of the area revealed no sign of Thomas Wright. His tracks, visible in the damp earth, led away from the clearing and disappeared at the edge of a dense thicket of rhododendron. Despite extensive searching, no trace of him was found beyond that point. As Harris helped Jessica back toward the main trail, she began to talk more coherently about what had happened. According to her account, the couple had been hiking normally when they noticed strange lights in the forest, small, glowing orbs that moved silently between the trees. "At first, we thought they were fireflies or some kind of natural phenomenon," Jessica later told investigators. "But they moved too deliberately, too intelligently. They seemed to be trying to get our attention, to lead us somewhere." The couple had left the main trail to follow the lights, which Jessica described as mesmerizing. As they moved deeper into the forest, they began to notice the symbols carved into trees, which seemed to mark the path the lights wanted them to follow. "We weren't scared," Jessica explained. "The lights felt peaceful, almost hypnotic. They seemed to be communicating without words, inviting us to see something special, something hidden." According to Jessica, they had followed the lights for hours, losing all track of time and direction. At some point, Thomas had become separated from her, following one group of lights while she remained with another. She had been waiting for him to return when the search team found her. The search for Thomas Wright continued for 11 days, involving multiple agencies and over 100 volunteers. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of him was ever found beyond the point where his tracks disappeared. The official investigation concluded with Thomas listed as missing, presumed dead, though no body was ever recovered. What troubled Harris most were the symbols found in the forest. He photographed them extensively and consulted with experts in various fields, archaeologists, historians, folklorists, but no one could identify them with certainty. "They don't match any known Native American petroglyphs or historic trail markers," Dr. Ellen Harding, an archaeologist from Appalachian State University, later reported. "The symbols appear to be unique, unlike anything I've encountered in my 30 years of studying regional rock art and tree carvings." Perhaps most disturbing were the reports from other search team members about unusual experiences during the operation. Several described seeing strange lights in the forest, similar to those described by Jessica Wright. One team member claimed to have heard what sounded like whispering when no one was nearby. Another found a perfect circle of stones that hadn't been there when they passed the same location earlier in the day. "I've been on hundreds of search operations, and I've never experienced anything like what happened during the Wright search," Harris later told a reporter. There was something happening in those woods, something beyond our understanding. I don't know what happened to Thomas Wright, but I don't think it was a simple case of a hiker getting lost. The case gained national attention, attracting paranormal investigators and curiosity seekers to the Linville Gorge area. The U.S. Forest Service eventually closed the section where the search had taken place, citing safety concerns and environmental protection. Jessica Wright returned to Charlotte, but struggled to readjust to normal life. She underwent therapy with Dr. Rachel Monroe, who specialized in trauma and unexplained experiences. Jessica's account was remarkably consistent and detailed. Dr. Monroe later wrote, "While one might dismiss her experience as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or dehydration, the physical evidence, the symbols, the scattered belongings, the fact that her husband remains missing suggests something more complex occurred." In 2022, Harris retired from search and rescue work, though he continued to investigate the symbols found during the Wright search. He discovered similar symbols had been reported in other wilderness areas across the Appalachian Mountains, always in connection with unusual disappearances or strange phenomena. "I've come to believe that there are places in these mountains that operate under different rules," Harris wrote in his memoir, published in 2023. "Places where the veil between worlds grows thin, where something beyond our comprehension occasionally reaches through. The Linville Gorge appears to be one of those places." The case of Thomas Wright remains open with the Burke County Sheriff's Office, file number 2020-074-MP. Jessica Wright still lives in North Carolina, though she avoids wilderness areas and rarely speaks of her experience. When she does, her account remains consistent with what she told investigators that day in the forest. "I don't know where Thomas is," she said in a rare 2023 interview. "I only know that he went with the lights to see something beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel their presence, waiting just beyond the edge of the forest. I hope one day he'll come back, or that I'll understand what happened to him." In the remote hills of Harlan County, Kentucky, folklore has been passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Stories of strange creatures and unexplained phenomena are as much a part of the culture as the coal mining that defined the region for decades. In the summer of 2021, one such story would prove to have terrifying basis in reality. 82-year-old Maeve Thompson had lived her entire life in the small community of Black Creek, nestled in a valley surrounded by steep mountains. A retired schoolteacher, Maeve had spent her later years documenting local folklore, collecting stories from elderly residents before they were lost to time. Her work had gained recognition from regional folklorists, though academics often dismissed the tales as superstition. One story that appeared repeatedly in Maeve's research was that of the tree walkers, mysterious beings said to live deep in the forest, capable of moving through the trees with unnatural speed and silence. According to the stories, the tree walkers were tall, thin figures with elongated limbs, who rarely interacted with humans, but were sometimes seen at the edge of settlements, watching from the darkness. "My grandmother used to say they were the original inhabitants of these mountains," Maeve told a folklore student in a 2019 interview. She said they were shy but not dangerous, as long as you showed them respect. And the trouble started when people stopped believing in them, stopped leaving offerings at the forest edge. Maeve had documented dozens of accounts of tree walker sightings dating back to the early 1900s. The stories shared remarkable consistency in their descriptions of the being's appearance and behavior, though most academics dismissed them as folklore or misidentification of known animals. The incident that would change everything began on the night of July 15, 2021. Maeve was awakened by a strange sound outside her small house, a rhythmic knocking, like wood on wood, coming from the direction of the forest behind her property. assuming it was animals or perhaps branches in the wind. She tried to go back to sleep, but the knocking continued, growing more deliberate and complex. It wasn't random, Maeve later told investigators. It had a pattern to it, like a message. I'd heard similar patterns described in the old stories, ways the tree walkers were said to communicate. After approximately 30 minutes, the knocking stopped, replaced by what Maeve described as a soft whistling, like wind through leaves, but with a musical quality. Curious and unafraid, Maeve had spent her life hearing stories of these beings and felt no sense of danger. She went to her back window and looked out. What she saw would challenge everything she thought she knew about the folklore she had spent her life documenting. Standing at the edge of her property, partially obscured by trees, were three tall, thin figures with elongated limbs. They moved with an eerie grace, their bodies bending in ways that seemed impossible for human anatomy. They were exactly as described in the stories, Maeve later recounted. Tall and thin, with arms that seemed too long for their bodies. They moved silently, their feet barely touching the ground, and they were watching the house, not with aggression, but with what looked like curiosity. Maeve watched for several minutes as the figures moved around the edge of her property, occasionally stopping to touch trees or rocks in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. The whistling sound continued, sometimes coming from one direction, sometimes another, as if the beings were communicating with each other. The most terrifying moment came when one of the figures turned its head directly toward Maeve's window. Though the face was partially obscured by shadow, she could see that it had large, dark eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. I felt like it could see me, even in the darkness of my house, Maeve later stated. There was intelligence in those eyes, an awareness that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The figures remained for approximately 20 minutes before moving silently back into the forest. Maeve watched until they disappeared, then sat in her dark living room, processing what she had witnessed. As a folklorist, she recognized the significance of what she had seen. A living legend, a myth made real. The following morning, Maeve went outside to investigate. She found a series of strange symbols carved into several trees at the edge of her property, symbols that matched those described in the oldest folklore accounts as tree walker markings. She also discovered a small arrangement of stones and branches on the ground, forming a geometric pattern she had only seen in drawings from elderly residents. Maeve contacted Dr. Ellen Harding, a folklorist at the University of Kentucky, who had been consulting on her research. Dr. Harding, initially skeptical, agreed to visit after Maeve described what she had witnessed. I've spent my career studying Appalachian folklore, and I've always approached it from an academic perspective, Dr. Harding later wrote in her research notes. What I found at Maeve Thompson's property challenged my understanding of what's possible in these mountains. Dr. Harding arrived on July 18th and examined the symbols and markings Maeve had discovered. She photographed them extensively, noting their similarity to symbols found in other parts of the Appalachian region, always in connection with strange sightings or unexplained phenomena. These symbols appear across a wide geographic area, but share remarkable consistency in design, Dr. Harding reported. They don't match any known Native American petroglyphs or historic markings. They appear to be part of a symbolic language unique to whatever these beings are. That evening, as Dr. Harding was preparing to leave, the knocking sound began again. Both women went to the window and watched as the figures emerged from the forest, moving with the same eerie grace Maeve had described 2 nights earlier. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, Dr. Harding later recounted. Everything about them defied explanation: their height, their proportions, their movement, They were biological entities, not hallucinations or tricks of light. I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. Harding managed to capture several minutes of video on her phone, though the quality was poor due to the distance and low light conditions. The footage shows three tall, thin figures moving through the trees, occasionally stopping to touch markings on the bark before continuing their silent patrol. The following day, Dr. Harding contacted a colleague, Dr. Samuel Chen, a biologist specializing in primate anatomy. After reviewing the video and examining photographs of the symbols, Dr. Chen agreed to visit the site. "What we're looking at here doesn't match any known primate or hominid," Dr. Chen later reported. "The limb proportions are wrong. The movement patterns don't correspond to any known species. Either we're looking at a previously undocumented species, or something that defies biological classification as we understand it." The researchers decided to set up monitoring equipment around Maeve's property, hoping to capture better evidence of the beings. They installed motion-activated cameras, audio recording devices, and infrared sensors. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, on July 22nd, the equipment captured something extraordinary. The cameras recorded 3 figures approaching the property shortly after midnight. The infrared footage showed their body temperature to be slightly lower than human normal, and their movement patterns to be extraordinarily efficient, with minimal wasted motion. The audio equipment captured the whistling sounds, which analysis revealed to contain frequencies and harmonics beyond human vocal capability. Perhaps most disturbing was what happened when the figures reached the edge of the property. They stopped and arranged themselves in a triangular pattern, facing the house. After several minutes of stillness, they began what appeared to be a coordinated movement, a slow, rhythmic dance, accompanied by complex whistling patterns. "It felt like a ritual," Maeve later described. "Something they had done many times before, a communication or perhaps a warning. They weren't threatening, but there was a seriousness to their actions that suggested purpose." The beings remained for approximately 40 minutes before disappearing back into the forest. The researchers collected the equipment and analyzed the data, finding evidence that challenged conventional scientific understanding. The story gained media attention when Dr. Harding, concerned about potential exploitation of the beings or their habitat, released a limited amount of data with a request for scientific rather than sensational coverage. The response was overwhelming, with researchers from various fields offering to study the phenomenon. The U.S. Forest Service conducted a preliminary investigation in August 2021, documenting the symbols and examining the site. Their official report acknowledged unexplained phenomena, but stopped short of confirming the existence of unknown entities, citing insufficient evidence. Maeve Thompson continued to document her experiences, noting that the beings appeared periodically over the following months. Their visits became less frequent as winter approached, though the markings around her property continued to appear, as if maintaining a territorial boundary. And in the spring of 2022, a team from the Discovery Channel arrived to film a documentary about the phenomenon. Though they captured some unusual sounds and what appeared to be fleeting glimpses of the beings, they failed to obtain the clear evidence they had hoped for. Maeve Thompson passed away in December 2022, but not before completing her book on tree walker folklore, which included her personal experiences. The manuscript, published posthumously, became a subject of academic debate, with some researchers dismissing it as folklore, while others viewed it as valuable ethnographic evidence. Dr. Harding continues her research, though she now works with a small team of trusted colleagues rather than publicizing her findings. "What we've encountered in Harlan County represents a genuine mystery," she wrote in a 2023 paper. Whether these beings are flesh and blood creatures, interdimensional visitors, or something else entirely, they demonstrate that our world still holds secrets we've yet to uncover. The symbols found around Maeve Thompson's property continue to appear periodically, though sightings of the beings themselves have become increasingly rare. Local residents, many of whom grew up hearing the Treewalker stories, now approach the forest edge with a mixture of fear and respect, sometimes leaving small offerings as their ancestors once did. As one elderly resident told a reporter, "Some things are better left unknown. The mountains have their own ways, and they don't always match what science says is possible. The Treewalkers were here before us, and they'll be here after we're gone." Long-haul trucker Raymond Ray Jacobs had spent 30 years driving the back roads of America, but nothing in his experience prepared him for what he encountered on a cold November night in 2022, while hauling a load of electronics through the Appalachian Mountains of Western Virginia. At 56, Ray was a veteran of the road, familiar with every highway and byway from coast to coast. His 2018 Peterbilt was his home away from home, equipped with all the comforts a long-distance driver might need, including a sophisticated CB radio system that allowed him to communicate with other truckers across multiple channels. The journey began uneventfully on November 3, 2022, in Roanoke, Virginia. Ray was hauling a shipment of medical equipment to Nashville, Tennessee, a route he had traveled dozens of times. The weather was clear but cold, with temperatures expected to drop below freezing in the mountain passes he would be crossing. Ray drove through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping for dinner around 7 p.m. at a truck stop near Wytheville. As he ate, he chatted with other truckers about road conditions and weather reports, learning that a cold front was moving through the area, though no precipitation was expected. Back on the road around 8:30 p.m., Ray tuned his CB radio to channel 19, the most commonly used channel for highway communication. The chatter was typical drivers reporting road conditions, sharing information about way stations, occasionally telling jokes or stories to pass the time. The first unusual occurrence happened around 9:15 p.m. as Ray approached the steep ascent known as the Devil's Backbone on Route 16. The CB radio, which had been functioning perfectly, suddenly filled with static, though the signal strength indicator showed full power. "I've been driving these roads for 30 years," Ray later recounted in his statement to the Smith County Sheriff's Office. "I know every dead spot, every area with poor reception. This wasn't that. The signal was strong, but the audio was nothing but static, not the normal kind you get from interference." Ray tried adjusting the frequency, switching channels, and checking his connections, but the static continued. Then, something strange happened. Cutting through the static came a voice, though not like any CB transmission Ray had ever heard before. The voice was high-pitched and childlike, speaking in a rhythmic cadence that seemed almost musical. "Driver on the mountain road," it said. "Stop and listen. The trees are singing tonight." Assuming it was a prank or perhaps a crossed signal from a nearby radio station, Ray responded, "Breaker 19, this is Rubber Duck. You're coming through weird, friend. What's your 20? The response came immediately. The same childlike voice, but this time with an echo quality, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. "We don't have a 20. We are everywhere and nowhere. The mountain is our home." Ray felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He looked at his GPS, confirming he was still on Route 16, approximately 5 miles from the summit of the Devil's Backbone. The road ahead was dark, winding through dense forest with no lights visible except his own headlights. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Ray said into his microphone, "but this channel is for professional drivers. Either identify yourself properly or find another frequency." The response this time was different, a series of clicking sounds, like insects or perhaps a faulty connection, followed by what sounded like whistling, faint but clear. The whistling seemed to have a pattern to it, rising and falling in a melody that was both beautiful and unsettling. Ray was about to switch off his radio when the voice returned, this time sounding closer and clearer. "Don't be afraid, driver. We just want to talk. It gets lonely on the mountain at night." By this point, Ray had reached the steepest section of the ascent, a narrow road with sharp curves and steep drop-offs on one side. He slowed his truck, concentrating on the difficult driving while trying to make sense of the strange radio transmission. "I've heard a lot of weird things on the CB over the years," Ray later told investigators. "Drunk drivers, people playing pranks, even what sounded like religious sermons from some station bleeding through. But this was different. There was an intelligence to it, a deliberateness that didn't feel like a prank." As Ray navigated a particularly sharp curve, his headlights illuminated something at the side of the road ahead, what appeared to be a small figure, possibly a child standing near the edge of the forest. Concerned, Ray slowed further, reaching for his microphone to alert other drivers. "Don't stop," the voice on the radio said, this time with an urgent tone. "Keep driving. It's not safe to stop here." Ray looked back at the road ahead, but the figure was gone. He scanned the forest edge with his powerful headlights, but saw nothing but trees and darkness. The transmission continued, the voice now speaking in a more normal tone, though still with that strange musical quality. "You see us sometimes, at the edge of your light. We watch you pass, the metal beasts carrying your kind from place to place. We wonder about you, about your world beyond the mountain." Ray felt a growing sense of unease, though he couldn't identify why. The voice wasn't threatening, but there was something deeply unsettling about it, a sense that whatever was speaking to him wasn't human, despite its childlike qualities. "Who are you?" Ray asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you?" The response came after a moment of silence, the voice now seeming to come from multiple directions at once, though still through the CB radio. "We are the children of the mountain. We were here before your roads, before your lights. We will be here after you're gone." As Ray reached the summit of the Devil's Backbone, he noticed something strange. His truck's engine, which normally strained on the steep ascent, was running smoothly, almost effortlessly. Glancing at his gauges, he saw that the fuel consumption was lower than it should have been for such a challenging climb. "We help you sometimes," the voice said, as if reading his thoughts. "We help those who show respect. The mountain remembers kindness." The descent on the other side of the mountain was even more challenging than the ascent, with hairpin turns and steep grades. Ray focused on his driving, trying to ignore the continuing transmissions, which now included what sounded like multiple voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. As he navigated a particularly dangerous switchback, Ray's headlights suddenly illuminated a large fallen tree across the road ahead. There was no time to stop at his current speed. A collision would be catastrophic. Ray braced for impact, closing his eyes for a split second. When he opened them, the tree was gone. The road ahead was clear, with no obstruction visible. Ray checked his mirrors, looking back, but saw nothing. Had he imagined it? A trick of the light, perhaps? "We cleared the way for you," the voice said, now sounding almost conversational. "You listened to us. You showed respect. The mountain protects its own." Ray drove the remaining miles to the base of the mountain in silence, though the radio continued to transmit strange sounds, clicking, whistling, and occasional words in that unknown language. As he reached the flatter terrain of the valley, the transmission suddenly stopped replaced by normal CB chatter from other truckers. "You okay there, Rubber Duck?" a voice asked. "You've been quiet for the last 20 miles?" Ray didn't know how to respond. How could he explain what he had experienced? Who would believe him? He mumbled something about radio problems and continued driving, though his hands shook on the steering wheel. The following day, Ray contacted the Smith County Sheriff's Office to report his experience. Deputy Michael Harrison took his statement, noting Ray's genuine fear and the consistency of his account. "I've lived in this county my whole life," Harrison later wrote in his report. "There are stories about strange things happening on the Devil's Backbone, especially on cold nights. Most dismiss them as folklore or tall tales, but Ray Jacobs seemed genuinely shaken by what he experienced." The investigation revealed that Ray wasn't the only trucker to have unusual experiences on that section of Route 16. Sheriff's records showed at least 8 similar reports between 2015 and 2022. All describing strange radio transmissions and occasional sightings of unusual figures near the road. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a pattern. All the incidents had occurred on cold, clear nights between November and February, and all involved truckers driving alone late at night. In each case, the drivers reported hearing childlike voices on their CB radios, sometimes accompanied by sightings of small figures at the edge of the forest. Local historian Eleanor Thompson provided context during the investigation, sharing stories passed down through generations about the mountain. The Cherokee who originally inhabited this region believed certain mountain passes were thresholds between worlds. Thompson explained. They spoke of spirits that could communicate through technology, though they had no concept of radios or trucks. They just knew that sometimes the mountain spoke to those who knew how to listen. Ray Jacobs completed his delivery to Nashville, but was so shaken by his experience that he took a different route back, avoiding the Devil's Backbone. He continued driving for another 6 months, but eventually retired early, citing the incident as a factor in his decision. "I've driven over 1 million miles in my career," Ray said in a 2023 interview. "I've seen accidents, witnessed miracles, encountered every kind of weather and road condition imaginable. But nothing prepared me for what I experienced that night on the Devil's Backbone. I don't know what I communicated with through my CB radio, but I know it was real. Sometimes, when everything's quiet, I can still hear that childlike voice, asking if I'm listening to the mountains sing." The CB radio disturbances continue to be reported occasionally by truckers driving Route 16, though less frequently since Ray's experience gained media attention. The Smith County Sheriff's Office keeps an active file on the incidents, though officially they remain unexplained. As Deputy Harrison noted in his final report, "Some places have their own rules, their own ways of operating. The Devil's Backbone appears to be one of those places. Whether what drivers experience there is paranormal, extraterrestrial, or some natural phenomenon we don't yet understand. The consistency of the report suggests something genuinely unusual is happening in that mountain pass. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. From the mist-shrouded peaks of the Appalachians to the desolate stretches of desert highway, there exist places where the veil between worlds grows thin. In these spaces, the rational explanations we rely on in our daily lives begin to fray, revealing glimpses of something beyond our comprehension." The stories we've shared tonight, from the vanished ranger at Blackwood Ridge to the mysterious voices on a trucker's CB radio, represent only a fraction of the unexplained phenomena documented across this country. Each account, verified through witness testimony and official records, challenges our understanding of reality and reminds us that despite our technological advances, we remain strangers in many parts of our own land. What connects these disparate experiences? Not location or circumstance, but the unsettling realization that we share this world with something beyond our understanding. Whether these manifestations are spirits, interdimensional beings, or natural phenomena yet to be discovered by science, they demonstrate that our world holds mysteries we've yet to unravel. The silence that follows these encounters may be more profound than the experiences themselves. It's in the quiet aftermath, when the lights have faded, the voices have ceased, the normal world has resumed, that the true weight of what witnesses have experienced settles in. They return to their lives changed, carrying the knowledge that reality is more complex and mysterious than they had previously believed. In the Appalachian Mountains particularly, where ancient peaks have stood witness to countless generations, these encounters seem to occur with greater frequency. Perhaps the deep valleys and dense forests create conditions conducive to these phenomena, or perhaps the rich tradition of folklore and storytelling in the region makes people more open to acknowledging experiences that others might dismiss or ignore. The witnesses in these stories, park rangers, truck drivers, ordinary families, were not seeking encounters with the unknown. They were going about their lives, working in familiar environments, when something extraordinary broke through the mundane. Their credibility lies in their very normalcy, in the fact that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by sharing their experiences. What strikes me most about these accounts is not the terror they often inspire, but the sense of wonder that accompanies them. Even the most frightened witnesses speak of a strange beauty in what they encountered, a recognition that they had witnessed something beyond ordinary human experience. This duality of fear and wonder perhaps best captures our relationship with the unexplained. As we've seen, official responses to these phenomena typically follow a pattern: initial investigation, documentation of evidence, and eventual classification as unexplained when conventional explanations prove insufficient. These case files remain open, not because authorities expect to solve them, but because they acknowledge the limitations of our current understanding. The documentation of these experiences serves an important purpose beyond mere curiosity. They create a record of human encounters with the unexplained, preserving them for future generations who might possess better tools for understanding or interpreting what witnesses have experienced. They remind us to remain humble in the face of mystery, to acknowledge that our knowledge of the world around us remains incomplete. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences helps build a more complete picture of the unexplained phenomena that occur across our country. Your story might provide the missing piece in someone else's puzzle, or simply offer comfort to those who have had similar experiences but feared sharing them. The Snowbound Screams will continue to investigate and document these accounts, approaching each with respect for the witnesses and openness to the possibility that our world contains more than we currently understand. We believe that by examining these experiences carefully and without prejudice, we contribute to a broader understanding of the mysterious forces that sometimes touch our lives. As we conclude tonight's journey into the unexplained corners of Appalachia, remember that these stories represent not isolated incidents, but ongoing phenomena. The lights still appear in Hollow Creek, the symbols continue to be found in the forests, the voices sometimes break through on radio frequencies late at night. These mysteries persist, awaiting not solutions, but understanding. The mountains keep their secrets, the forests hold their mysteries, and the darkness between our world and whatever lies beyond remains thin in certain places. We navigate this landscape of the unknown, not with answers, but with questions, not with certainty, but with wonder at the possibilities that surround us. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.